¿Cómo están?
Hola.
Les traigo aquí a un gran profesor emérito de la Universidad de Chicago. Su nombre es Coyne. Él es un biólogo evolutivo que ha estado trabajando por los últimos 40 años en la evolución, porque la evolución es verdadera. Publicó su último libro el año pasado que se llama Fe versus realidad. O sea, ¿qué podemos saber de la fe acerca del mundo versus la realidad de los hechos? Y vamos a tener una conversación acerca de su último trabajo. So, hello, Jerry. I think I just introduced you.
Nice to meet you.
So, the topic of this year, it's Beyond X. And beyond X can be beyond uncertainty, but beyond knowing, beyond science. Do you think in this day and age where truth and not truth are so much in question, are there other ways of knowing about the universe than science? Can we go beyond science?
Yeah, that was going to be what I talked about. This conversation is a last-minute change, but I just realized that I could have conceived it as not beyond science, that there are lots of claims that there are other ways of knowing what's true about the universe and the world besides science. I mean, there's religion, there's personal revelation, there's art, literature, music. All of these are claimed to be ways of knowing about the universe. I argue about them constantly. But, you know, after I thought about it a while, I realized they don't work. The only way of knowing is through the empirical methods of science, of what's shown about true. So if you say, well, we can go beyond science in understanding the universe, my answer would be no. There's just no other way we know of to do that.
Of course, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm also very aware, and you have been in discussions about this quite actively, that there are people who say that we can know the universe and moreover human nature through the fine arts, namely music, literature, and poetry. And that often people say, well, the poets always knew this before the scientists, right? So what would you have to say about the fine arts in relation to ways of knowing?
Yeah, this is the argument. I mean, most intellectuals in America at least have given up religion, so they don't count that as a way of knowing. But fine arts is the one I get into arguments about. Can we know anything about humanity or the world from literature, art, music? And my answer would be no to that. We can maybe come to know something about ourselves from our subjective understanding of reading. I mean, my own life has been changed by reading books like Zorba the Greek and other books that emphasize the temporariness of life, so you want to take advantage of it. But that doesn't, for other people, that might not be true. So what you get from literature at best is a sort of personal truth, a subjective truth that is not at all the same kind of truth that you and I study in the field. So if you're trying to generalize about the world from the fine arts, you just can't do it. I mean, they're not equipped to do it.
Sure.
They don't use the methodology of science. Plus, they're different books and different paintings tell you different things about the world.
So what would you say the value of the fine arts are in relation to ways of knowing?
Oh, yeah. So I don't mean to denigrate literature, art, and music. I think for a scientist, I'm pretty appreciative of those things. I just don't think that the purpose of the arts is to tell us what's true. They're representations of states of being that are largely fictional and one person's conception of things. And they're not set up. They don't use any empirical methods to tell us what's true. So the value of art, to me, lies in its representation of emotions in a way that does two things for us. It shows us the commonality of our own experience with the rest of humanity. Everybody has the experience of saying, I felt just like that when you read a good book of literature. But you also have the experience, for example, reading Moby Dick or Crime and Punishment, that you say, well, this is another way of thinking about what it's like to be somebody else. Now, you don't know whether that's true or not, but it at least gives you some possible insights into humanity. Now, whether they're true or not,
sure.
I mean, if you read Moby Dick and you say, well, was this really what it was like to be a whaler in the 19th century? Well, you can't know that from the book. You have to go back and do a scientific study of whaling.
Sure.
But you can at least emotionally respond to things.
And perhaps it doesn't really matter whether Capitan Ahab in Moby Dick was really the way he was portrayed in the book, right? I mean, there's a whole new field that's called literary Darwinism, in which basically works of literature are studied and with the understanding that our mind has an evolutionary past. So in that sense, there are themes that arise.
Yes, and
Right.
I think that literature, I mean, that's one of the values of literature that can have for science. I don't think that literature is completely useless in understanding the world. It can suggest hypotheses. And literary Darwinism is one of these. If we found out, reading book after book after book, that there was a consistent theme in books, and the example I use is there's an effective birth order on personality. Firstborns tend to be dominant, conservative, versus later born children, which tend to be more flexible, less neurotic. If you saw that over and over again in literature, you might think, well, maybe there's something to that about human nature. But then, in order to confirm that, you'd have to go and do an empirical, scientifically based study.
Of course.
Of that, right? So,
Of course.
So literature can contribute to forming hypotheses, but I
Yes.
don't think it contributes. The understanding itself has to come from the empirical methods of science.
Yes. So, of course, hypothesis generation using literature or arts in general is a fantastic use of the fine arts. But I'd like to ask you, there's another use which other evolutionary biologists have pointed out, that given that we live in a social, complex world, just reading fiction seems to work as part of our essential training as natural psychologists, right? And the fact that fiction is often darker for children is actually might be quite interesting in the sense that it is a safe place to perhaps enact and imagine
Yes.
scenarios that otherwise would take the cost, the actual fitness cost of living them would be much higher, obviously, right?
Yes, that's one value of it. Another one is empathy.
Sure.
I mean, literature is one of the great inspirers of empathy. There's a huge controversy in America about whether the book To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't know how many of you know that, is safe for children to read. But what that book does is inspire a lot of empathy towards the oppressed black people of the 1950s. And so that's not a scientific conclusion. It's an emotional reaction to literature, which nevertheless is quite valuable. And it depends on our evolutionary heritage, because how can you have empathy for somebody else unless you can feel what it's like to be them?
Yeah.
So.
Can we talk about another aspect of Beyond X? So beyond X, the X is also uncertainty, right? And the question could be, can we go beyond uncertainty? I would say no. So maybe the question more realistically is, can we go beyond the fear of uncertainty?
Yeah, well, for a scientist like you and me, this is one of our general personality traits, is we're not afraid to not understand something. In fact, that's what motivates us.
Sure, it's fun.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's not true in general for people. I think that's one reason why religion is so popular, is because we don't know for certain what's going to happen to us after we die. I have a pretty good idea, because I'm an atheist, but people can't handle that not knowing. And so they fill in the vacuum with imaginative revelation, which is religion. And that leads to a kind of way of knowing that's not really a way of knowing, because we have no certainty at all about that. But I'm absolutely sure that humans can live with the kind of uncertainty that has inspired religion, because look at Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and Germany and France. Those are largely atheistic countries. People don't believe in God. I think like 90% of Swedes are atheists, and those countries are doing fine. I mean, the people are happy. They're very moral societies. They take care of each other. So, the kind of uncertainty that leads us to existential angst, I think we can learn to live with, as long as we have somebody or some society to take care of us.
So maybe that leads to a very personal question, which is, why do you care about this?
Why do I care? I'll reconceive that as why you should care. And why am I up here talking about this? I wrote a book about this called Faith versus Fact. Why you should care about other ways of knowing is that because they've distorted humanity's way of understanding the universe, that we think that things like personal revelations, and you saw this in the climate change debate, where I have to say I agreed with the Kraussian side, that the other side was basically basing its way of knowing about climate change on what they wanted to be true. But what you want to be true is no guide to what is true. And so that's the main lesson why science is the way of knowing. So if I wanted to leave you with any message, it would be this, that there are not different ways of knowing. There's knowing through science or empiricism, and there's not knowing. And that's all we have. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great. Thank you.